Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I am so delighted you've joined me for a story tonight, because as I say, nothing in this world beats a good story. And I know you agree with me, because I think we're all kindred spirits in that regard, aren't we? And so I send you great big hugs and kisses from where I am and to where you are, and I hope the weather's treating you favourably. So let's get started with our story tonight. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Claudia. For some unfathomable reason, I've always enjoyed washing dishes. Something my family has never understood or altogether appreciated. I'm certainly not a clean freak, but I do enjoy washing dishes in warm soapy water, and the pleasurable feeling of that warmth on my hands that filters through my rubber gloves. I usually pile the rinsed dishes neatly in the dishwasher for a final wash, so that when I remove them from their cycle, they sparkle as if they're brand new. It's things like this that I find oddly comforting. I suppose we all have our oddities in our lives that bring us pleasure, and this is an absurdity of my own. Our kitchen overlooks fabulous views onto the long red brick driveway of our home. I love looking out at those views, especially when I'm washing dishes. I can hear the television blaring in the living room, and the spirited, argumentative voices of my two children, Tyson, who is 9, and Jennifer, who's 8. I can hear the annoying sound of the television blaring loudly in the living room, and the spirited, argumentative voices of my two children, Tyson, who's 9, Jennifer, who's 8. I can hear them squabbling between each other about what to watch on television. It is so typical. I guess they're fighting over the remote control, which predictably happens every evening without apology. In my experience, kids will be kids, and my children, they're no exception to that rule. They can never agree about what to watch on the box. My husband Graham is sorting them out. Right, that's enough, kids. No more squabbling, you hear me? I tell you what, we'll toss a coin, shall we? To see what we can watch tonight on the box. Is that a deal, or is that a deal? I think it's very fair, don't you? The peppery, fervent argument between my two children promptly subsides, although I can hear my daughter saying, "But I really want to watch Ridiculousness, Daddy. I like Ridiculousness with Chanel West Coast. Tyson wants to watch those horrible, ugly trucks with the big wheels. I hate the trucks with the big wheels. They're so boring. I want to watch the funny stuff. I like the funny stuff." I smile contentedly to myself as I place another plate in the hot soapy water and sponge away the stain of food on the plates. My husband always knows how to sort out the disputes between our kids, and his strategy of negotiation is far superior than mine. The weather is miserable outside, which makes me feel oddly cosy being stuck indoors like this, while the rain thrashes indiscriminately down our roof, leaving drops of water drizzling down our glass panes, which has somewhat thwarted and rather clouded my view this evening outside the kitchen window, which of course is a tad disappointing. It is dark outside. The pearly moon tonight is obscured behind some murky cloud cover, which often happens when it rains. I'm used to the rain. It happens a great deal in our part of the world. We live close to the Wenatchee National Forest in Washington State. We moved here about 2 months ago, as the property is very spacious. It's a stone and wood double-story bungalow that I fell in love with at once. And I'm not the kind of person that tends to fall in love with bricks and mortar, but this bungalow offered a lifestyle to me that made me think of the Waltons. Me and my husband Graham saw it as the perfect place to raise our 2 rambunctious children. By all accounts, they love it here almost as much as I do. It took a while to persuade my husband Graham that we should move out here, and that it was the right thing for us to do. He thought we might feel a little cut off from civilization, which is ridiculous given that the nearest town is less than 25 minutes away from us. But I guess when you're out here, you do feel very alone with the trees and the indigenous fauna and flora, and you can get the false, rather misleading impression that the civilized world is a whole galaxy away, which of course is far from true. In the very beginning, it took a lot of adjustment to move to the countryside, as I was a city girl born and bred, and was used to the sound of heavy traffic, the obtrusive annoying honks of taxicabs, the breaking sound of a bus, the chatter of people's voices shouting at each other across the sidewalk. So being interrupted at night by different sounds, like the wailing wind whistling through the trees, or the strange haunting animal sounds that echo through the woods, would make me in the beginning feel rather discomposed. But I guess I'm getting used to it now. I'd say to my husband, "What the hell is that?" And neither of us would know. But every night we heard strange whooping sounds, muted howls, squawks from the woods, and sometimes I could swear we would hear a woman scream. But I'm not about to try and locate the source of those strange noises. Sometimes it's best to live in ignorant bliss. Well, that's what I think anyway. So despite having to make adjustments to our new lifestyle, I have welcomed gladly the change from life in the city to life in the country. I think we've become much more relaxed and easygoing, not permitting the stresses of everyday life to get us down in the way they used to. Sometimes I feel as if we're living in the middle of nowhere, as the properties in our part of the world are spread out magnanimously and are surrounded by remote country roads and a plethora of trees everywhere you look. But in our area there are ubiquitous amounts of horse riding trails and fabulous walks that you can enjoy a stone's throw away from the house. It's the kind of idyllic spot that generously invites into your living space an abundance of indigenous wildlife. Shortly after we moved here, a mother cougar brought her cubs to frolic around on our patio. It was almost as if she took absolute delight in introducing them to us. She appeared remarkably tame. I got the profound sense she was showing off her cubs to us, as if to say, "Look at my offspring, aren't they absolutely marvellous?" and was so typical of any proud mother. So we've seen it all out here. It's not uncommon to wake up in the morning to see deer scampering over the lawn, and I just love it all. One thing I've learnt about living here is never to rely on the weather, for if the weather was your girlfriend or boyfriend, you'd dump such an unreliable, fickle partner in a heartbeat, knowing full well that he or she would find it impossible to remain faithful to you. When I first moved to this part of the world from Houston in Texas, I would always listen to the weather forecast promising a great sunny day, and 2 minutes later, the sincere, reassuring promises were rudely dashed when it suddenly bucketed down with rain. I soon learnt never to rely on the weather forecast and to always travel with an umbrella, come rain or shine, as my personal insurance policy, guaranteeing I won't get caught off guard and return home from a shopping trip looking like a half-drowned kitten. I have one of those short, stout umbrellas that fits rather snugly in my shoulder bag, that I take with me everywhere I go. Regretfully, it's got used rather too frequently of late for my liking. My family have just finished eating dinner, so they're casually relaxing in our living room, feeling fully satisfied. Ostensibly much like the cougar we've encountered, I'm a very proud mother that takes delight in taking care of her offspring. I thoroughly enjoy cooking, much like washing dishes. I find cooking rather therapeutic, which has to be a good thing, as I wistfully fantasize about myself becoming one of those indispensable country housewives that makes everything from scratch, from their own bread to butter and cream, although I've got a long way to go to become like the barefoot Contessa, but it is a work in progress. For dinner I've cooked pancakes tonight, filled with chicken and mushroom in a creamy sauce. It's absolutely delicious, even if I say so myself. It's an Italian recipe the family always thoroughly enjoy. One of the quintessential tricks is to add a touch of truffle oil to the mushroom sauce, and it takes the sauce to a whole new level that even my unsophisticated kids appreciate. My little boy Tyson says to me, "Mummy, why do you make mushrooms taste so much better than anybody else does?" I don't tell him about the truffle oil that I add to the sauce. I guess I want my son to believe that his mother has got magical abilities, like Aladdin's lamp, and can turn a dowdy plate of mushroom sauce into a sensory experience that titillates the taste buds. It was my mother-in-law that first introduced me to truffle oil, She bought me back a bottle from a trip to Italy, and let's just say I'm hooked on using the stuff with chicken and mushrooms every time. Our greyhound Juniper is sitting next to me on the kitchen floor by the sink, waiting patiently for any leftovers to be thrown into her bowl. Juniper really appreciates my cooking, and if there's chicken and mushroom pancakes going spare, you can bet she'll raise her paw to request a tasting. She's always exceedingly worried she'll be overlooked after our dinner is eaten. But that would never happen under my watch. I have a passion for dogs. I remember on a recent visit to Turkey, I bought food for the street dogs there, and I'll never forget the appreciation in their dark eyes as they tucked into large pieces of chicken kebab and pita bread, looking at me as if I was some kind of demigod. And to them, I suspect I was. Juniper is in luck tonight. 3 pancakes are going spare. She gobbles them down appreciatively, licking her chops, looking at me adoringly through her soulful dark eyes. I always give Juniper leftovers, and my vet tells me she's got one of the healthiest coats he's ever seen. So it would seem the tidbits she gleans after meals appear to be enhancing her health exponentially, although I haven't mentioned to the vet that my dog's diet includes the odd extravagant indulgences like truffle oil. One thing my family does not know, that I haven't cared to divulge to them, is that I am aware that there is a Bigfoot on our property. From the moment we first moved here, when I was on my own during the day, I'd feel certain I was not alone, and that I was being watched. I told myself I was being absolutely ridiculous. I thought that I was so used to life in a city that I must be imagining things. But one day in my peripheral vision, I could swear I saw a dark face staring at me through the kitchen window. I felt the eyes on me, but when I quickly turned around to look through the window, nothing was there. Another thing that had been so bizarre is that whenever it rains, my washing that would be drying on the line was always rescued and placed on the table of my wraparound porch, as if someone or something had rescued it for me. Very often at night, when I'm washing the dishes at the kitchen sink, I've seen the Bigfoot, a very dark, black, shadowy silhouette, with a bullet-shaped head, moving across our driveway through the trees of our grove. For a moment the figure stops, and the yellow eyes stare in my direction. I have often wondered if the critter can see me, but there is no way he or she can look in through the kitchen when it's dark outside. Or maybe he can, I don't know. Whenever he crosses the red brick driveway, it looks directly at me, almost as if it's returning my gaze. I get the profound sense that he or she knows I'm watching him, although I guess it would be difficult for the critter to stare in at me. The first time I saw his distinctive shadowy form cross our driveway, I nearly dropped a whole pile of dishes on the floor. I was astounded, my heart pounding in my chest at a dime to a dozen. I didn't know how to react to what I was observing, and for a moment, like I always do, I thought I'd imagined the whole thing and was obviously deluding myself. I thought, no, that couldn't have happened, until the event kept replaying every evening like Groundhog Day. So I knew what I was seeing was no trick of the light, no tug of a wild imagination leading my mind mischievously astray. For me it was like I'd been thrown off my perch, as if I'd been hit by a miniature earthquake, as a sighting like this shook my view of the world, like the snow in one of those pretty glass globes you can shake really, really hard, and usually it plays a musical tune for you. I remember thinking to myself, surely not. I had closed my eyes very tightly, to open them cautiously again, and the creature was still standing there watching me, as if he was saying to me, "Yes, I am real. I know you don't believe I am, but get over it." I always get the bizarre feeling that he wants me to see him, that he wants me to know he's watching me, and I guess that should make me feel unsettled, but it doesn't. Even from the kitchen window, I can feel the Bigfoot's benevolence. I do not get the impression I have anything to fear, although I dare say, if I got close to the creature, I'd probably have a heart attack. It would be a daunting experience for me, I'm sure. I don't think he would hurt me, though, especially if he's generous enough to take down my washing from the line when it's raining. That shows great emotional intelligence and great compassion. Every evening I see him, almost as if he's patrolling the property, as if he's on guard duty. I know this sounds bizarre, but I get the impression he's watching over my family to keep us all safe, and that is a very cosy feeling. The Bigfoot is always carrying something in his overlong arms, rather like a dead squirrel, I suspect. I'm not sure if he's alone or not. In truth, I haven't seen any more of his kind on my property. I'm referring to him as a male because for some irrational, incongruous reason, I suspect he is. He just seems to have a male energy about him, and even when I view him from a distance, I can see he's absolutely gargantuan. I always see him like clockwork when I'm washing the dishes at night. But tonight, even if he's standing watching me through the rain, I will not observe a thing. The rain has sadly obscured my vision from the kitchen window, which saddens me because I've got fond of my fleeting sightings of him every night. I've grown attached to seeing him regularly. I feel an absurd kind of connection with him, as strange as it may sound. I guess it's like sitting on a train every day, if you're commuting to a city, and you see the familiar faces sitting opposite you, giving you a polite nod. You don't know them in person, but you're acquainted with them by sight. If you saw one of them in a shop, you'd likely smile at them because you know them, even if you don't, if that makes sense. You might turn around and say to your friend, "I know that person over there. They travel with me on the train every morning." And yet you really don't know them at all. You may wonder why I've made no mention of my strange Bigfoot sightings to any member of my family. Believe me, I have my good reasons. I just want to keep this secret close to my heart. And for some absurd reason, I selfishly don't want to share this encounter with anyone. My sister-in-law, Simone, has become my best friend in recent years, and I usually tell her everything, but I've never told her about the idiosyncratic visitor on our property. She once told me that a friend of hers thought they'd seen a Bigfoot here in Washington State. And do you know what? I said, "Oh, I'm sure she's mistaken." I didn't want to admit to my best friend that these creatures are real. I'm not sure what that says about me. I will admit that my son, despite being so young, got very attached to the television program Finding Bigfoot before I'd seen the creature for myself. "Mummy," he cried out happily, "I like Bigfoot 'cause he's real." I told him that no such idiosyncratic creature existed in North America because if they did, there would be evidence by now. Those were my famous last words. My husband Graham made a face at me as if to say, "How could you be so mean to our son? Why don't you at the very least humour him?" Tyson was in tears, saying, "Why are you so mean, Mummy? He's real! He's real! I know he is! I've seen Bigfoot myself running across the yard, and he saw me too. He even smiled at me." I told him he was talking nonsense and to not make up tall stories like that, because it wasn't good to lie. But now I don't think he imagined what he saw at all. It makes me wonder if my son saw the very same Bigfoot I've been watching from the kitchen window. My sister-in-law, Simone, doesn't have any children of her own, not from want of trying, of course. She has told me always to listen to what your kids have to say, and not to always put it down to their imagination. I realized in that moment my cursory remarks to my son that I made about the Bigfoot had been unkind, but now I know the ambiguous creature does actually exist. So I guess I've got egg on my face, but I'm not about to eat humble pie. Not just yet. My pride does have a habit of getting in the way. I have tried to look for the mysterious Bigfoot in the daylight hours, by taking random casual strolls in the woodgrove with Juniper by my side. But I hasten to say I've never seen anything, but the feeling I always get in the woodgrove is that I'm not alone, and that I am being watched. But when I look around, nothing is ever there, which makes me feel as if I'm going a little crazy, although Juniper does appear to see something that I cannot see with the naked eye. She tends to run up to this particular tree in our woodgrove and jump up and down, very excitedly, like she does when she's greeting a friend of ours. It's an absurd thing for her to do. The tree in question is a tall oak tree, and on several occasions I've found long dark strands of hair on that tree, that I suspiciously suspect belongs to the Bigfoot. So maybe Juniper is seeing and observing things that I can't. I do know that animals have extrasensory perception, and Juniper is always fixated on that tree for some reason, as if she's seeing something that I cannot see. It's all very, very odd. I'm so disappointed that on this night it is so wet outside, and the windows are so misted up that I'll never get to see the Bigfoot. But one thing I cannot mistake is the flashing of blue lights as a truck rolls down our driveway and parks discreetly outside our front door. A niggle begins to tickle at the pit of my stomach, nature's ominous warning that all is not well. In my quintessential experience, police do not arrive at your house after dinner in less than agreeable weather, unless something is terribly wrong. I hurriedly remove the rubber gloves from my hands and throw them onto the plastic drying tray on the side of the sink, and release a huge troubled sigh that comes out from the pit of my stomach like a nasty gurgle. Juniper nimbly trots out of our kitchen, down the long passageway towards our front door, and sits down promptly on her haunches in patient expectation to wait for the visitors to be greeted and invited into our home. She has never barked for some reason. Juniper does not feel the need to communicate with loud barks, which is something I am permanently grateful for. I glance through the archway of the living room, where my family, oblivious to the arrival of the police, are slothfully stretched out across pieces of furniture, with their eyes angled towards the television. I sigh with relief, knowing that they are fighting fit and strong and in good health, apart from a mild screen addiction. And my husband is in good form, eyeing the television with a slack jaw. So my family is safe and sound, and that gives me enough comfort and encouragement to gather up the strength and the courage to answer the front door. But when I hear the loud, formidable knock, I almost jump out of my skin. There is something ominously unnerving about the tone of that knock. It sounds authoritative, not friendly. Somehow one is never emotionally prepared to answer the door to the police. Then an image of my beloved father swings into my mind obtrusively. I get a flash of his beautiful, engaging white smile, his thick glasses that frame his kind blue eyes, his thin, wispy hair, peppered by grey, and I suddenly feel biliously sick. Please God, may nothing dreadful have happened to my dad. My mother died a long time ago, and my father is all I've got left in the world, so losing him would be absolutely devastating for me. My husband Graham calls out from the living room, "Claudia, sweetheart, will you be a dear? Will you answer the door? I think we have a guest." I wonder privately to myself whether my husband Graham would be in such a dreadful hurry for me to answer the front door, if he had any idea who was standing on the other side, because these are the kind of visitors no one would gladly welcome. The rapping continues, and I brace myself for the impact in receiving these unwelcome visitors into our home. They can only be bringing with them bad tidings. Otherwise, why would they even be here? I straighten my back, which is something I have always done, to give myself a bit of courage. I speedily walk over to the front door, gingerly opening it with a vacillating hesitancy. I peer through the open crack at two officers both wearing Burberry trench coats. They look cold and wet. "At least it's not the kids," a gentle voice whispers into my head. "At least the kids are all right." My husband is safe in the living room. Graham returned home early from work this evening, claiming he wasn't feeling great, but in truth I don't think he was sick, as he had seconds of my meal tonight, and in my experience, when my husband is ill, he makes a poor showing with his food. The officers are wearing uniforms. One of the cops I suspect is in his 30s, the other probably in his late 40s, although I can't be sure. I've never been good with age. The expressions on their faces are grim, and I can taste the bad news before they even utter a word. My heart lurches with a nervous trepidation, and for a brief moment my legs seem to almost be cemented to the floor, as I stand there in the doorway, gawking at the officers, as if I'm staring at a flying saucer on our front yard, from which two green men have suddenly emerged. I'm trying to digest the absurdity of what I'm seeing. Two officers on our doorstep. It's not a pretty sight. "May we come in, ma'am?" they ask me politely. "Is your husband at home?"
We are here to speak with a Graham Hancock."
"That's right. That's my husband," I say, bouncing back to reality. "Is everything all right, officer?" I ask nervously, my eyes narrowing suspiciously as I study them. The officers remain stoically composed. Their serious expressions give nothing away. I take off their wet trench coats, hanging them on the hooks in the hall, which they seem to appreciate. With a pounding heartbeat, I lead the officers into the kitchen. "You wait over here," I tell them. "I just don't want to upset my kids. Please just take a seat at the breakfast nook. I'll call Graham for you. He's in the living room with our children watching ridiculousness on television."
"That'll be most kind of you, ma'am," says the older of the two officers, studying me through his brown hawk-like eyes. I am certain I have seen pity in them. I walk hurriedly towards the living room, standing in the doorway, my legs trembling beneath me. My husband, on sensing my presence, looks up from the television. He's been laughing at something on ridiculousness, as someone gets whipped cream all over their face, and his dogs are licking the cream off his skin, and my kids are roaring in delight, pointing at the screen in abject amusement. Chanel West Coast is saying something like, "Yuck! That is so gross!" Graham's face goes grave as he looks at me. Who's at the door? What's wrong?" he asks, as I stand, still trembling. "It's the police," I whispered, so that my children can't hear what I'm saying. "They want to speak to you." My husband gets up from his comfortable wing chair, and even at 6 foot tall, he suddenly appears very small, as the colour fades away from his face. He's become so grey. He suddenly looks rather sick. He follows me into the kitchen very somberly. I feel as if I'm watching an ominous movie, of which my family are playing key characters in this drama. We're acting out a screenplay, where a regular suburban family is about to have their lives dramatically turned inside out, like the washing in your linen basket. My father always taught me, from when I was a young girl, to learn to prepare for bad news, because at one point in our lives it will always affect us. He'd say, "I want you to remember, Ladybug," which was his nickname for me. "Life is not always a bowl of cherries, and it is not always fair." The officers have not taken a seat at the breakfast nook like I had persuaded them to do, but they seem glad to be seated after my husband insists that they take a seat. I hurriedly rush over to the electric socket on the wall to switch on the kettle, as the act of doing something eases my trepidation. My hands are shaking violently. My heart is pounding violently in my ears. It's almost hard to hear what the officers are actually saying. "I'm Senior Constable Watkins. This is my younger partner, Constable Rothford," said the older of the officers, looking directly at my husband. "Are you Graham Hancock?" "Yes, that's me," says my husband, laughing. My husband unfortunately inappropriately always laughs at the wrong time. He laughs when he's nervous. I think for him it's a self-soothing gesture, which can be very embarrassing. I remember he once laughed when a good friend told him his mother had died in a motor car accident. He had laughed and told him how sorry he was. "You think it's funny?" his friend had asked him. "I've just lost my mother. Are you seriously warped in the head to find this funny?" He didn't appreciate that my husband laughed to ease the discomfort of the awkward situation. It's a coping strategy, I suspect. I just hope he doesn't laugh with what the officers have to say next. That isn't going to be a good look. I then remind myself that maybe this fortuitous visit from the police has nothing to do with us at all. I mean, the police always canvass the area, don't they, when there's been a robbery of some kind? I persuade myself that this is why they're here in our kitchen. Of course it is. I'm suddenly looking forward to that moment when everything is fine and I realised how paranoid I was. I'll be telling Graham what I thought the visit was about. I'll say to him, "You're never going to believe it. I thought your mum had died or something terrible like that." Graham would lightly roll his eyes and chuckle. "Why do you always worry, Ladybug?" Graham also calls me Ladybug, after he heard my father calling me that name, and I guess it kind of stuck with him. I anxiously edge forward to take a seat next to my husband, and that's when I know unequivocally that my worrying is absolutely not unfounded, by the beleaguered expressions on the officers' faces, which are as dark and overcast as the gloomy, bleak weather outside, which has refused to abate and is wantonly reflecting the now melancholic mood of the entire kitchen. My children, who were previously completely caught up in their television program, have now come bolting into the kitchen at a very inopportune moment, wearing their cute pyjamas, their bright little eyes growing round with surprise when they see the officers sitting with us. "Why are the police in our kitchen?" my son asks. "Go back to the living room, sweetheart," I say. "Me and your father are having a private conversation with these nice officers. We won't be long. Now quickly go back to the living room." My 2 children reluctantly obey, walking away with Juniper trotting behind them, her tail dangling between her legs, as animals are quick to pick up on the lugubrious energy of a household, and ours has suddenly sunk into a dark depression. "First, I need to confirm with you, sir, that you are relatives of Elspeth Hancock." "Yes, we are," said my husband. "She is my mother." "Well, I'm sorry to inform you," says the senior constable. I close my eyes tightly, waiting to brace for impact, almost as if I'm in an aeroplane that is about to experience a colossal crash landing. I already know what he's going to say. My mother-in-law is dead. Claudia's account, 10 years before Elspeth's death. I'm not sure what I expected when I first met Elspeth Hancock. I guess I'd expected my future mother-in-law to welcome me into the Hancock family with open arms, like another daughter, but my hopeful expectations were sadly derailed. I was left feeling bitterly disappointed. Graham had never warned me that his mother could be as cold as a fish, nor had he told me how wealthy his parents actually were. Graham had told me his father was in the medical profession, so I assumed he was a doctor of some kind. Graham was so ambiguously vague with all the details regarding his childhood and his parents. I had nervously asked him whether he thought his parents would actually like me. He'd slapped me on the back as if I was a bloke and said, "What is all this about? Of course they will love you. How can you possibly doubt that?" "But what about your mother? How does she actually feel that we're engaged to be married? I mean, she's never even met me," I'd asked him obsequiously. "What if she doesn't like me, Graham?" He had tweaked me affectionately on the cheeks and said, "Ladybug, for goodness sake, you worry far too much. Of course she'll love the bones of you. Besides, she's not marrying you, is she? I'm the one that's marrying you." He did have a point. I had smiled happily to myself, imagining the perfect mother-in-law, with pale blue eyes and an effervescent personality, who would sweep me up in her arms to give me a large, effusive hug, and say, "Welcome to the family." The kind of woman I could happily exchange recipes with, and meet for coffee in the local town for a pleasant chit-chat. But I'm afraid that wasn't to be. Elspeth Hancock was not the kind of potential mother-in-law that I'd actually envisaged for myself. It really is a pity you cannot choose your in-laws. Well, so I thought at the time. But there you go. I was in for a rude awakening. I was to discover that my mother-in-law was very aloof. Her face when she met me was as emotionless as a white piece of paper, and I'm not very sure whether she was pleased to see me or not at the time. But then I guess by nature Elspeth Hancock was naturally insouciant. But I was not to know that, and I did take things rather too personally. I remember thinking she had taken an instant dislike to me as her future daughter-in-law. I really wanted her to like me. When we drove up their grandiose driveway in a green leafy neighbourhood, where the houses made no apology for being opulent, as most of them were rather like palaces, I was certain Graham had taken the wrong turning in the road. There was no way his parents could live in an illustrious neighbourhood like this, unless they were actually made of money. I was about to express my reservations that he was going down the wrong way, when he simply parked his white SUV outside the stunning wrought-iron gate, and with his remote control, the gate just opened as if by magic. He turned around in the driver's seat to look directly at me. He grinned and said, "Ah, we're here." I remember gawking as we drove up the pristine driveway, with its manicured lawns and perfectly landscaped gardens, and I looked at Graham in astonishment and said, "Your parents live here? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?" Are they the Rockefellers or something?" My fiancé, immune to my astonishment, laughed and said,
"You didn't think they lived in the stable block, did you?"
I had thought his parents would have lived in a modest blonde brick bungalow or a double-story wooden home, like the simple home I'd grown up in as a girl. But this I had not envisaged at all. I remember privately marvelling at this immodest mansion. So posh it was. It was seeping with the unabashful wealth of new money. My fiancé led me gently by the hand. He opened the door of this intimidating mansion with a spare key. The ornate door had been superbly handcrafted by a master craftsman, and it opened up onto magnificent sprawling white marble floors that extended from the vast foyer to other areas of the house, like a large river meandering into smaller tributaries. I observed a grandiose winding staircase with elaborate wrought iron balustrades that swept elegantly up from the basement to the first and second floor. I noticed hanging above the staircase from a very high ceiling was the most exquisite crystal chandelier that I have ever beheld. There were stunning displays of artwork and sculptures sporadically dotted around the foyer. I felt as if I'd stepped into the pages of Hello magazine, where celebrities smile flirtatiously into the camera as they drape themselves decadently and rather extravagantly across glamorous furnishings, coquettishly teasing the camera with their choreographed poses, while the man of the house, wearing Wellington boots and a tweed jacket, enters the house with a golden retriever at his feet. It was that kind of house which in that bewildering second had successfully stolen my breath away. It was almost as if I was having a bird's eye view of one of the smaller palaces like St. James's or Clarence House. And yet my future fiancé had not cared to mention any of this to me. I now felt conspicuously underdressed in this stately home. I had asked Graham what I should wear.
"Come as you are," he had chuckled. "You look fine in your jeans. There's absolutely no need to dress up for my parents. It's just Sunday lunch, for goodness sake. No one dresses up for Sunday lunch, do they?"
"In a house like this, I think they do." I was now grinding my teeth in indignation. I was wearing dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, and felt significantly underdressed and daunted by the finery that surrounded me. I wanted to dash back home quickly and change into a ball gown at once. I'd seriously like the ground to swallow me whole. I'm about to tell Graham that I want to go back to the apartment as quickly as possible, to change into something much more suitable, when a tall, friendly man with dark hair and an olive complexion emerges through an arched doorway, with a broad beam on his face. He is very laid back, wearing a crisp cotton open shirt, and on seeing his son, he throws his arms around him, while Graham slaps his dad on the back.
"Well, well, you've finally decided to grace us with your presence, have you, son? And who do we have here?"
he says, studying me through curious green eyes. He lets out a whistle and then kisses me on both of my cheeks.
"You must be Claudia. We've heard all about you, we have." "Well done, son," he says. "You've done incredibly well for yourself," he says, giving me a friendly but cheeky wink. "It's very, very nice to meet you, Claudia. Very nice to meet you. And I'm sure the wife will also be thrilled. Welcome to the Hancock family."
"Hello, it's very nice to meet you, Mr. Hancock," I say, unable to suppress a giggle, as Graham's father oozes charm.
"Call me Theo," he says. "Now where is that annoying wife of mine?" he says, looking over his shoulders. "She always has a habit of disappearing when we have company. She can be as elusive as the Scarlet Pimpernel. Elspeth, Elspeth," he calls out. "Graham and Claudia are here. Would you be so kind as to grace us with your presence?"
So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.